Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started as everybody is filtering in. Again, we're excited to be here and appreciate everyone being here this morning. We are really excited to have our next speaker with us this morning. She definitely has the best last name of any one of our speakers, so I'm going to try to get it out here. But our next speaker, or our first speaker this morning, is Valerie Tinklepaugh-Hairston. Am I good? Perfect. All right. Well, we are excited to have Valerie. She comes to us today from a company called Calvin, and she is the clinical product manager for innovative technology and healthcare company called Calvin. Or Kelvin, sorry.
All good.
We're in the vicinity. All right. She spent 18 years at the collegiate level, 12 of those at TCU up in Fort Worth. And so, again, we're excited to have her here this morning, and I will turn this over to her.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to take this bad boy off because I move a lot. I hope that's okay with y'all. Well, good morning. I think they actually asked me to be the first speaker because even without coffee, this actually is my normal energy level. So for any of those of you who have interacted with in the morning, you can vouch for that. So good morning and happy Friday. I'm so glad to see people in live and in living color. It's so great to see all of your faces, and thank you for waking up to hang out with me. As mentioned, I am the clinical product manager for Kelvy, but I will disclose this presentation is not sponsored by them. Actually, they gave me off this morning to be here for this, so appreciative of that. They actually have me flying to Boston tonight, so just prayerful that I actually make it in, because apparently there's like 8 inches of snow, so yay. But I did not receive any financial compensation for the companies I mentioned in this presentation. They are literally just the things that I have used and seen great results with. So please use your professional discretion when applying any of the topics I mention here. So we have to do the objective thing, so please know we're going to work through a definition, we're going to talk through some things, and really what I enjoy doing is really working through the actual application. I feel like a lot of times we go to these presentations and we hear a lot of science and we get told all of the things, but then we leave going, okay, so what? So don't worry, I promise at the end we will get to the so what. So we're going to talk about recovery today, and I think a lot of people want me to give you like a checklist or something to do, and unfortunately I'm here to tell you I do not have a checklist for you because recovery is a journey, not a destination. Yes, I did start with a cheesy slide, but there we go, it's 8 a.m. So we will start with our definition. The definition of recovery is really broad and big, but I think it's important for us to start here because it's an act or a process, right? There is no one thing we can do. So when our athletes or our patients come in and they say, I need to work on my recovery, there is not a check box to do to get you there. It's a process. It's also the restoration, right? Which means we need to know what we're getting back to in order to restore getting there, right? We have to know a baseline, or we have to understand our norm to know how to restore. And then it's the regaining of something lost. Again, we have to know what we've lost in order to regain it. And then this is an interesting one for me that we can kind of get into if we have time, but the extraction of useful substances from waste. There can be some fun stuff in recovery. Again, if we have time or you kind of nerd out on stuff like this with me, we can have time at break to kind of dive into some of this. But allowing your body to recover really does allow us to restore function. It allows us not just to repair tissue, but to make gains with tissue. And there's also a psychological component to recovery. We're going to dive in a lot to that because I think that's a component that we often overlook. So let's just start with this. The human body is flipping amazing. Can we all agree to that? Like when you watch like the Olympics this summer and you're seeing some of the moves people do or the strength that some people have. This actually right here on the far right is one of my friends, Misha. She was an athletic trainer with me at Villanova, and she now owns a gym in Scottsdale, Arizona, where she works on the bridge of people leaving physical therapy and returning to performance as an athletic trainer. Pretty sweet, right? And her body and like the things that she's able to do. And we talk so much about mobility and stability, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But just to see she's this tiny little nugget of a human, and the way she's able to just throw weight around is honestly astounding to me. I've recently started working with the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders, and I'll be honest, I had not watched have any of you watched the show, Making the Team? Okay, it's real life. I'm not gonna lie. If you have questions, I have answers. It's a lot, but I'm actually unbelievably amazed by what they're able to do with their bodies. Like seeing that up close, seeing a dancer's movement and watching the stability in their motion and watching how graceful yet how powerful they are is truly awe-inspiring. But it's really challenged my brain to think about their recovery. I did 18 years of women's basketball. I worked with girls who were 6'3", 220, who were muscle power banging into people. That's a very different mindset than this graceful, elongated body that these dancers have. And then down here in the corner, this is actually one of my rifle athletes. I worked with the rifle team at TCU, won a few national championships, kind of fun. But she is actually a staff sergeant in the Army, and she's one of their sharpshooters. I will not lie, when they told me I was working with rifle, I was like, so trigger finger? Thank you. I got my first laugh of the morning, yes. But honestly, I was shocked at what their bodies went through to be so still and so stable, to put off 20 shots in 20 minutes in a prone position. I get restless after like 5 minutes with my pillow, right? They're having to control their breathing and control their movements to such minutia to hit a target that's like a pinhead. So when she had a muscle spasm in her back, I couldn't just grind it out like I did with a football player and tap them on the backside and say, let's go get him, right? That wouldn't work for her. So what I'm really hoping that you're seeing by looking at these 3 different beautiful photos is that we ask and demand things of our body. So when we talk about recovery, we also have to ask and demand of ourselves, what are we doing to help them recover to get back to what they need to do? So again, I think a lot of us want this blanket application. We want this really cool check sheet that I'm going to hand you at the end of the presentation so you can hang up in your athletic training room and call it a day. But unfortunately, I'm going to tell you it's not that simple. So when we think of recovery, if we think of it like any other injury, if you will, we think of what we're going to treat. So we're going to treat pain, we're going to treat soreness, and we're going to treat fatigue. Right? So we're going to need to identify which one of these things are we seeing when someone says, I'm coming in to recover. Right? Are they in pain? Do they have soreness? Where is that soreness at? It's that soreness to be expected. I'll touch on that here in just a second. And then fatigue. I think we can all say, not just because it's 8 a.m. and not just because it's Friday and not just because it's a new year, but we're all really tired, right? I'm also married to an athletic trainer. We were both college basketball athletic trainers when we got married, so if you want to check my sanity, we can do that later. But he works at a high school now, and he is tired. So I empathize with all of you for what you're going through right now. It's exhausting. Our athletes are also exhausted, right? I'm thinking of my nephew who, played 4 sports, which, yay, multi-sport athlete, but that also meant that he was eating dinner in the car while doing his homework in the back seat to go from one practice to the next, to hopefully get to bed on time, to hopefully wake up on time the next morning to sprint to the bus to do it all over again. He was tired. When he would call and say, Aunt Val, what do I do? What do I give him? He doesn't have time to eat, barely has time to sleep. What magic pill can I give him to get him recovered? And unfortunately, the answer is there is no magic button. There is not one thing that I could give him in that moment to say, hey, bud, here's what you can do to feel better. Here's how you can restore to your former state. Here's how you can get where you need to go. However, I will say that I think if we take a step back and really think about the stages and phases and components of recovery, we can find ways to make a difference. So I'm not up here to be doom and gloom and tell you there's nothing you can do. I definitely think there's ways that we can intervene. We just have to be really strategic on those interventions and using them at the appropriate time with the appropriate people in the appropriate way. So what are the components that we need to consider? Well, the first is, was there damage done? Is there an inflammatory response? That initial inflammatory response is good. I think so much of the time we're like anti-inflammatory, but really our inflammatory process is our body's way of sending the necessary chemicals out to do the repair and remodeling. We need some inflammation in our body. It's when it gets out of control or our body's not able to manage it properly that we tend to have the issues. So I don't really want to mask pain in July with my women's basketball team when they're making their biggest strength gains. So this is a really big nugget. I actually identified the training cycles and I would tell my team, you're going to be sore. And what are we gonna do about it? We're gonna do some very basic things, but I'm not gonna throw the kitchen sink at you in July. Because guess what? I need to be able to throw the kitchen sink at you in March when we're heading off to the Big 12 tournament and you're about to go up against Baylor. I'm gonna need you to be ready then. So I'm gonna need you to learn how your body feels with some soreness and with some breakdown in July so that we actually can figure out what works for you in March. So just real quick, if I can do a poll, how many of y'all are in the secondary setting? Okay, how many of you are in collegiate setting? Professional, clinic, industrial. Any of the above that I did not mention and you feel left out? Sorry, Buzz, my bad. Buzz is actually my mentor, so that's fine. Oh, which actually should probably judge me on that too, but that's okay. Thanks, Buzz. When we're thinking about the high school setting, what does this mean? So this means when they're doing their summer workouts with performance course or whatever that is, maybe we don't need to throw them in the cold tub every day. Is there a pin drop? Sorry. Okay. Now, obviously, heat illness, whole other story. We can talk about that in a very separate lecture. But what are we doing in the summer? We're trying to make gains to get them ready for a season. When might we need that cold tub? We might need that on the Thursday so that they feel refreshed and ready on Friday, right? So we're not saying don't do it. We're saying let's pick and choose our times to make it the most effective to control some of these things. The second one is waste removal. This is our lymphatic system. And there's some really great technology out there right now, especially some of the compression boots, compression pants, some other lymphatic device, the Hivamat, Mark Pro, and some other things that really enhance lymphatic drainage. But let's also talk about, and we'll dive into this here in just a second as well, if you're not hydrated and your kidneys don't have fluid balance to work, who cares if we're pushing all this stuff through the lymphatic system? So again, we can check a box by saying, well, we did the boots, we're good, but if we haven't addressed these other things, are we really doing the most good? Okay? Regeneration and remodeling. I'm gonna challenge us to get outside of our heads and not just think about this in terms of musculoskeletal, but start to think about our CNS system. Our central nervous system controls all the things. So if we are not considering the psychological component of recovery, we are really missing the boat, y'all. This is a huge component in our nervous system. You know the kid that hits the wall? Well, did they hit the wall because of cardiovascular, because of musculoskeletal endurance, or because their CNS is done and it's truly fatigued, right? So just another consideration. And then really homeostasis, and the thing that I want to say about this is if we look around this room right now, not one of us is the same. Not one of our athletes are the same. Even if we lump them in by position group in football, they're still not all the same. Especially y'all in the secondary setting. Goodness gracious, the difference between a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old, right? I mean, even in the college setting, the little like baby giraffes that came in as freshmen that leave us full-grown adults, when they graduate, they're not the same human. I can't treat them the same. So what do we treat? Okay, I've talked all about what we can't do, but what do we need to do? Well, we need to consider a lot of things like our season. We need to consider timing. We need to consider the culture. I teach organization and administration at TCU, and I've done a lot of reading on social determinants of health, and I definitely think we have not done a great job of taking that into consideration in a lot of our general athletic training environments. So things like if you have a vegan athlete, right? If you have someone that has a different week schedule than what we do in terms of prayer, in terms of religious services, are they having to wake up early or go to bed late because of something? Are they having to work an extra job because of family finances? You telling them to take more time to sleep isn't going to do anything because of those social determinants of health. So really getting to understand your patient and your athlete's needs are hugely important when it comes to recovery. Again, we talked about your CNS, soft tissue quality we'll get into. We'll talk a little bit here about dysfunction as well. General fatigue, load management, we'll talk about that. I have a little asterisk there, so don't let me forget. Wow, I'm going to put that on you not to let me forget about that. And then psychological needs. Okay, so here's the magic answer. What do athletes need based on research to recover? That is not what y'all were thinking, right? I think you're probably hoping I was going to put up some picture of some device that you could purchase tomorrow, just put it out in the athletic training room and it was going to be good. But really it comes back to the basics. What do we really need to recover? Well, we need food. Despite all of the trends, despite all the fads, goodness gracious, Lord have mercy, the beginning of the new year, right? We have seen every ad on Instagram for every whatever it might be. Take out this food group, add this in, here's your magic drink, here's your magic shake. Our athletes see that as well. But we have to remind them that for performance and for recovery, they need protein, they need carbohydrate, they need good fats, they need vitamins, and they need minerals. You are not going to be able to rebuild, repair, and regenerate without them. Your timing matters. Are you eating pre, during, and post? Because guess what? If you're not eating that, it's going to be really tough to recover later. What are you eating on your off day? Now, I am not going to stand up here and claim to be a dietitian. I am so not a dietitian, but I've worked with some amazing ones. I will also tell you, if you are looking for nutrition advice, my best advice to you is to follow college athletics dietetics accounts. Whether it's your alma mater, someone you like, someone you don't, follow their accounts. They will put up really great information like this. Don't overthink it. This is someone who gets paid money to put together plates for athletes. Why not follow their Twitter or their Instagram and see the information they're giving out? They have obviously made that information to be public for active people. Knowing most of them, they want to help the community, so please take advantage of that. I didn't create this. A lovely lady named Brooke Helms did, and man, has this helped me when talking with other athletes to give them a visual like this. Always give credit where credit is due, but please follow those accounts. You know that they're going to be certified sports dietitians. You know they're going to be registered and licensed, so they're going to be reliable sources for that information. So now I am going to give you, because again, I told you I'd give you practical applications, a few things that in my practice I've had really great results with that also have science to back them up. The first is tart cherry juice. Have any of you utilized tart cherry juice? Yay. Okay, you can get it at Walmart now, right? So tart cherry juice has been shown to have anti-inflammatory components. I actually took tart cherry juice after my last knee surgery. I actually have a cold allergy, and so I used a lot of tart cherry juice to help with my inflammation. So huge fan of tart cherry juice. Dosing can vary, especially on the size of the athlete, so make sure you consult with someone, but tart cherry juice is really great. Obviously, there's a gazillion recovery drinks out there. I would say the cleaner, the better. The less ingredients, the better, and the ingredients that you can actually read. If you have an athlete or a patient who's lactose intolerant, take that into consideration, but there are so many lactose-free options these days. The biggest things about this is that they're getting you the protein and the carbohydrate that you need. They're also fluid, so that's also going to help in recovery. So having access to these, if you don't have access to a recovery drink, chocolate milk. Talk to your school cafeteria. It's available at almost every gas station. Something that is pretty easily accessible to most students is chocolate milk. Great to have. The magic hour right after activity is the time that you really want to get that in. Turmeric curcumin has also got some pretty solid research behind it, talking about its anti-inflammatory components, as does cinnamon, vitamin D, and omega-3s. Which all kind of makes sense when you start to think about it. Personally, I think some cinnamon and some turmeric in a little tea with a little whiskey, I call that a solid recovery drink for any of you that need that tonight. So it's a healthy hot toddy, right? Okay, hydration, speaking of. So I have a picture down here of an adaptive athlete. Had the opportunity to work a little with UT Arlington and their wheelchair basketball team. And let me tell you, another athlete that I did not consider their different needs. If you're working with an adaptive athlete, please use interprofessional collaboration to understand their needs. I was truly overwhelmed by their athleticism, but also very underwhelmed at my knowledge of how to help take care of them. So definitely just something to think about if you're working with different populations. So again, just considering the essential functions, when you're talking with your athletes, I think a lot of people get really bored with just drink water. Well, they want to know why, right? So giving them, hey, this helps with your kidney function, right? If your pee looks like the Dr. Pepper you're drinking, we got problems, right? So we put up these really awesome signs behind the toilets during two-a-days to talk about hydration status, but we don't tell them why hydration matters. And we don't talk to them about electrolyte content. And we don't really talk about that fluids matter, or that eating foods that have high fluid content help, right? So I think we need to get away from just pushing water and actually talking about why hydration matters, right? All of those different functions, thinking about how wet our body really is on the inside, and how we have better oxygen exchange, how our brain has better function, how our muscles function more properly, how our blood volume matters. All of those things are hugely important with hydration. And again, thinking about when it happens, and especially on the off days. Again, some very reliable sources. Amy Goodson is one of my good friends. She is a dietitian, and she wrote a really cool little flip book that has just like really easy, like fast food gas station options. And I think finding practical people like that is really important. So again, when you're on the inters of net, when you're on social media, when you're on all of those things, make sure you're looking at reliable sources. We all know that letters after our name can kind of become alphabet soup. So I look at their content. Are they giving me evidence-based information, or are they just retweeting and reposting what someone else came up with? Are they giving me reliable information that's backed, or are they giving me a really cool picture that caught my eye? So obviously, athletic trainers, physical therapists, in our space, we know Gatorade gives us just a ton of really great science on hydration. Go to their site, utilize their sources. If you have parents with questions, send them there, right? Really great, reliable information. Okay, here's where we start getting into the good stuff. Activity. We know that movement is medicine. Right? We know that after a day out on the court, out on the field, if we just sit around, we're going to be stiff and sore. So we know that active recovery has the best results in terms of soreness and return to activity. The research has been completely conclusive on that. Active recovery is king. So what does that mean, and what does that look like? I promise you at the end, I will actually give you real things that I do and some actual ideas for what this looks like. But let's talk about what that kind of means. Heart rate variability. So when we talk about data science, we talk about load management, it's really interesting to me because we have all these very cool measures that are out there. But again, if we don't know how to apply them, and if we don't know what that means, it's kind of a waste of data. Right? The application of that data is as important as the collection of that data. You can have a million polar printouts. If you don't know what to do with it, why bother? Right? So So for me, looking at activity, especially in terms of recovery, was looking at what are the things that I can do with my athletes to check some of those boxes we talked about earlier. Can I work on some of their dysfunction? So again, let's go back to the idea of soreness. If I have someone who is sore in their quads after a 1 rep max PR day for squat, makes sense. If I have someone that is more sore in their right leg than their left after an activity where no one else is really feeling anything, what if I'm more sore in one extremity than another? What if I start to get sore in some places that maybe kind of start keying me in about some tension or some other things? The athlete that comes in with all the the scalenes that are on fire, right? Their rhomboids aren't firing, their lower trap's not firing, and they're just knotted up. Is that normal soreness when they play soccer? No, so maybe this activity is my opportunity to work on some dysfunction. Maybe this activity is my opportunity to work on some mobility or stability or some activation issues that we're having. Last night, we were talking about the athletes that come in with low back pain and how so many of them aren't really low back pain. It's actually erector spinae fatigue from overuse, because the erector spinae actually take you more into back extension than going into hip extension. So you can actually start to work on activation of the hamstring and glute. I actually like using a gun and doing a little co-contraction. And you can actually get the low back pain to start to dissipate by working on hip extension and activation of other muscular tissue. That's exciting stuff, especially on a recovery day. Not only are we feeling better, we're making them better. If you've ever hung out with me for even a half second, you will know that one of the pillars that I stand on is mobility and stability. And I think this is really, really important for all of us to look at and think about, that all of our joints have a primary role of either being a mobile joint or a stable joint. If we are not thinking about the tissue that surrounds that joint and its role in its mobility or stability, we are missing out on a huge opportunity. So when we think about our baseball pitcher, right? And we think about him coming through in that motion. If he is missing scapular stability, that might be causing that elbow pain. Or what if he actually doesn't have the internal rotation on the hip of the opposite side, so as he's coming through, he's actually blocked there and having to dip down more, right? So understanding this continuum is huge in terms of understanding dysfunction and can really help on those recovery days. And here in just a second, I'll show you some ways of working on that. Also thinking about our soft tissue and that old school, the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone, right? Well, all of those muscles are also connected. They're also connected by fascia and other tissues. And again, if we're not thinking about the elongation and the 3D image of the way that our soft tissue connects and wraps in our body, we're missing out on a huge opportunity to help with recovery and soreness, and even to improve performance on the back end. Thought this picture was kind of cool, again, just to kind of remind us of some of those connections, of some of those origins and insertions, and some muscles that might be doing the job they're not meant to do. We have a lot of athletes out there that, how do I say this with a politically correct lens? They haven't really been coached by the best, right? They've developed some habits that may not be the best for their performance or for their bodies. So how can we help in some of that dysfunction? How can we help them with some of that form? How can we teach them and show them during recovery how we can get better? So a couple things that I do. One of my favorite things right here is maybe a laser. Okay, so this is ankle mobility, super simple, knee to wall. You literally push your knee to the wall. You can find out a lot about this motion. Within this motion, you can look at their feet. I mean, is that an oar paddle or what? I mean, we talk about a flat foot, I tell you. So I can actually work on some midfoot, because remember, we want that midfoot to be we want the midfoot to be stable. So I can work on some midfoot stability, even in this, while I'm working on that ankle mobility, right? So really working a lot on dorsiflexion here. You can compare bilaterally. This is really great for someone who has calf soreness, right? Really working on the mobility of that ankle. If you've had someone who's had a ton of ankle sprains and they get spatted on Friday nights and they're taped and braced all week, this is a really great thing for them to do on recovery days to really open up that ankle joint, get some mobility in there. You will be amazed at how much you can see a decrease in calf soreness by working on ankle mobility. So again, that connection of what is the joint supposed to be doing and what is the soft tissue around it doing. Over here, I'm actually using, I don't know if you can see, it's not purple shorts. That's actually a black voodoo band. How many of you have ever used a voodoo band before? Awesome. Super interesting. The science is kind of sketchy on it, but it works, so I use it. Really great if you have someone that needs that extra warm-up or super tight or super stiff, someone who needs to get the blood flow going. So this athlete actually had a core muscle injury. So we worked a ton on her hip adductors, worked a ton on her hip flexors. Hip flexors, this is another kind of nugget, worked with a pelvic health physical therapist. She gave me this one, awesome tip. A lot of times we work on stretching our hip flexors because we say they're tight. They're not actually really that tight, they're over weak. We don't really use them that much. Challenge your athletes to sit here. Let's see if I can do this in heels. Here we go. We'll work on my stability here too. Doing like 10 reps of a short arc hip flexion, and people will start to fatigue out and start to shake on like rep 10 or 11. It's unbelievable, right? By the way, y'all, that was my surgical leg. I feel pretty good about my stability now. I think that was pretty good. But working on that hip flexor, huge, huge, huge. If you're seeing any weakness in kind of this anterior hip piece, look at that hip flexor and actually check its strength and its endurance. One of my favorite things in the world is called the SuperSix. It's done on a foam roller. Really awesome. It's like a reset for the upper extremity. Again, working on mobility and stability here. So working on scap stability as well as shoulder mobility. Also getting a little nerve glide action in here as well. This is my men's golf team. I'll mention them here in a second. But really the idea of being able to dive in and give them an activity that they can learn and start to see the daily difference between start to finish, between beginning of season and mid-season. So having some routines built in there where they can start to compare and start to see, am I sore here? Am I a little off here? And giving them some ownership. Banded hip mobs. Again, one of my favorite things. You probably weren't getting any manual therapy from me unless you had done some sort of mobility or stability or activation work prior to. And hip mobs, again, saw huge differences in this. Here, using the band for traction on an ankle mob, and then using some yoga to also work on some of that mobility and kind of a stretch, but really working on some motion happening within joints versus just static stretching. Because again, the research on static stretching says for some people it's really more of a CNS recovery. It's just the breathing and the sitting still. It's not actually doing anything with the tissue. So how can we better use a stretch to get some better results where we're getting the breathing, we're getting the CNS recovery, and we're also getting some musculoskeletal recovery as well. Okay, here it is, to ice or not to ice. How many of you ice for pain? How many of you ice for swelling? No judgment zone. Okay, how many of you ice for recovery? Okay, how many of you do cold whirlpools for recovery? Contrast therapy for recovery? Warm tub for recovery. Awesome. Okay, was there a wrong answer in that? And the answer is no. But it goes back to that beginning. Why are you doing it? When are you doing it? Who are you doing it with? Right? I know coaches are not always the most fun. I actually dated one before I married an athletic trainer. So I learned my lesson, right? So what I learned with that is that they are doing what they were mentored to do. So if their coach said, go get in the cold tub after practice, they got in the cold tub after practice. And I think we've fallen a little bit into that as well, where a lot of times we'll just do it because that's what we've done. But I would challenge each of you to ask yourself why. Why am I doing it? COVID taught us a lot about that, right? Because we got rid of a lot of things that we were really comfortable with because of rules and distancing and all of that. And we still had sports happen. Okay? So I would just challenge you to look at the research. The evidence, I'll be honest, y'all, The evidence on cooling, as I disclosed early, I work for a medical device company. I literally read research about cooling, contrast, and heating therapy every day. And if I could tell you there was one paper that you should look to be the end-all be-all of when to ice and how to ice, I wouldn't be up here because I'd be a gazillionaire and owning my own company, right? There is not one article that will tell you exactly how to do it. So I would challenge you to read some of this information and figure out when and why are you using it. This article right here actually says that collectively these results indicate that intervention with topical cooling disrupts the normal adaptive responses to exercise. Okay, well, what does that mean? Again, it depends. If it's in the summer, that means I may not use topical cooling. But if we're going to play for the Big 12 championship tomorrow, I might ice you for a solid 10 minutes, right? I'm gonna make that clinical decision on when and how to apply that because that's what you need and that's what your body needs at that time, and we know you well enough to apply that. Again, thinking about you in the high school, I know you guys are so overwhelmed with so many athletes, so there do need to be some blanket prescriptions for some things. But again, where are you pulling that from? Are you pulling that from your data sets of your athletes where you know where they are typically more sore? Or again, is it the summer? Are we heading into district play? Are we into playoffs where we really want to add something new in there and spice it up a little, right? We can still apply these even if it's not individually. We can still apply it seasonally to our different teams and what they're going through. Okay, if I told you that I could give you a pill that would decrease your odds of getting injured by 61%, what would you pay for it? If you went to your coach and said, Coach, I got a thing, it'll decrease our risk of getting hurt by 61%, they'd probably buy it, right? What if I told you that was getting more than 8 hours of sleep? I know I didn't last night, right? This study showed that getting greater than 8 hours of sleep at night decreased your risk of getting injured by 61%. And the reverse was also true, that those athletes that reported getting less than 8 hours were 1.7 times more likely to get injured. So if we are preaching guns and boots and, wow, that sounded real Texas, right? Guns and boots, sorry. But if we are preaching the different modalities of percussion instruments, recovery boots, and getting into tubs and cryosanas and float tanks and all of the other things, and we don't address sleep, we're missing our number one recovery tool. And I know it's hard. I know it's hard on these kids. Again, my husband has an athlete whose family lost their apartment and they're sleeping in their car right now. How do we talk to him about recovery, right? But where we can, this is hugely important. Can we encourage people to be done a little earlier on Thursday nights? I know in the college setting, we talked a ton with our academic people about moving some of our study hall stuff up earlier so they weren't in study hall until 11 o'clock at night, so they could actually go home and get some sleep. But please, please, please note that the studies are so conclusive that sleep is what we need for recovery, and we all know that when you think about the science behind it. It's the time that your body can actually rest and repair. It just makes sense. But my encouragement to you is to start addressing it with your athletes and your patients. Okay, some other things we can do. The mindfulness, there's a ton of apps out there now. There's also bedtime yoga and some other cool things that can help prepare you for sleep. One of my favorite tricks is actually going on your phone and turning down the brightness or turning on the nighttime reduction, the blue light reduction, or blue light glasses for people who do have to be on screens, because also the evidence is very apparent about blue light affecting our sleep habits. Okay, here are two things that you probably have not heard about in terms of recovery. That is collaboration and time. We forget that all of these things take time. There is no magic button. There is nothing that I can give you that will magically speed up recovery. We can enhance the environment, but if we are not collaborating with coaches, with strength and conditioning coaches, trying to figure out if we can get in touch with that random club coach that seems to want to do everything all the time, right? And talking to them about something that we see brewing within an athlete, that's a huge component of recovery. Our athletes have to know, that they need the validation to know that it's okay to take the time to recover. And then support. One of my favorite quotes from Otho Davis is, your athletes won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So for those athletes that maybe are resistant to the changes you're trying to implement, or the athletes that maybe are like, man, I don't care what you say, doc, I got my membership to the cryo club and that's where I'm going. Okay, cool. Well, I care about you here, and here's some of the things, and this crazy chick in San Antonio told me about this, and I'd love to try it with you. Or maybe you have your leaders, your kids on the team that you know if they do something, others will follow. Can you get them to buy in? Instead of posting the chart on the door, can you do it as a part of a team meeting? Or show results, or tell them why we're doing it, maybe give them a little investment, give them some choices. We also know that if they have a choice in something, you're giving them the options, but they get to make the choice, they're far more likely to stick with it. So how can we create an environment of recovery where it's not just a thing that we do, but it's part of who we are? It's really tough in this grinded out culture, I get it. Here I did want to talk real quickly about my men's golf team. So golf is, again, one of those sports where we don't really think about recovery. And then I walked 36 holes with them, and I was like, oh, I'm a little sore, right? That eccentric load on my calves really got me. We started every Friday morning. They came into the athletic training room for 45 minutes, and I set up stations for them to work on recovery. Now, are 45 minutes going to overcome all the rounds they played during the week? Absolutely not. But it was little 30-second, 1-minute bouts of things that they could learn that they were able to do back in their dorm room, or they were able to do out on the course that they started implementing throughout the week. They started doing it on their own. And now 3 of these guys are actually playing professionally, and they're still doing the same recovery stuff we did when they were at TCU. And my little redhead standing right next to me, he actually won the Big 12 over any of you golf fans, Victor Hovland. Victor's pretty good, and Hayden kicked his tail at Big 12 that year. It was pretty fun to watch. Now, I'm not saying it was my recovery routine, although I would love to take a little bit of credit. It definitely was not my recovery routine, but I think it was the mindset that they understood it was important for them to take care of their bodies. And once they started making that investment, it wasn't $1 million like LeBron, but once they started making that investment, they saw the changes, then they started telling other people. They started telling other athletes. Now the buy-in really occurred, and that's where we saw the biggest changes occur. Okay, so I promised you the real stuff. I think I've got like 10 minutes maybe, right? Okay, if not, I'm just gonna take it. All right, here we go. Okay, so sample recovery sheets. What did we actually do? Well, let me show you. So this was actually prepared with my strength and conditioning coach when I was at TCU, and we actually used our polar data to come up with this. So here is where we used that load management to decide which group our athletes were in. So we had a high load group and a low load group. Why did we not have a medium? Well, because if you know the game of basketball, you know that there's a certain amount of players who play, and there's a certain amount of players who cheer. There's not usually very many in between, right? I might have had a larger load one game than one player. Just saying. End of the bench cheering can really get your heart rate up. Okay, so we had an active recovery with Group A, or if there were multiple days off, what our Group B could do. And as you can see, it's a little bit more intensive in terms of their cardio, a class in the rec center. We really kind of gave them options, right? Again, this was where their buy-in came in. I had one girl who loved her some Zumba, so she would go to the rec center in Zumba. I loved it. She got out of her dorm room. She interacted with other people. There was a sociological component to that. There was a mental health component to that. It was awesome. And then I had my Group B, and these are my kids. I had one girl that played a lot. She's playing 40 minutes a game. I'm not sending her to Zumba. Lay, stretch, yoga, breathe. Okay? That's what we were doing. So this was based on weight room activity. Here is one from another one of my good friends that was the strength coach at TCU. He is actually now with the Indiana Pacers, but this is when he was in the G League. What he did was take in some of those other components, and he made a challenge for his athletes where he gave them a point goal. So he would look and say, Bubba, you got to get 10 points this week. Okay, based on your activity, based on your load. Now, again, if we're measuring that, or the eye test for a lot of people still works, your running back who plays both ways probably needs a little extra love, than your kid who's holding up the defensive call sign. Okay? So how many points does he need? Well, he gets points for that sleep. He gets points for taking in his shake. Now we're encouraging those behaviors with a carrot instead of with a stick. Right? I love this technique. This is great in a high school setting. So if you have a group of like your starters who you say, you got to get 10 points of recovery and you list out what that looks like, they can even make it a challenge. Can someone at the end get a sweatshirt or something fun like that, right? So starting to make it very realistic, but also so they can start to understand the importance of certain things. This was probably my favorite. And this is something that I used a lot at TCU. I actually hung it up on my door, and I am more than happy to share it. But what I did here is I broke it into 3 columns so that they would understand the why. One column is joint health, one column is soft tissue quality, and one column is general recovery. And these are the terms I actually used with them. I used very real healthcare terms with my athletes. My athletes knew where their VMO was. And they knew there were 4 muscles in the quad and 3 in the tricep. We worked very hard on that one, okay? But I taught them this because I wanted them to have that same buy-in. I wanted them to understand that we weren't doing mobility for my health. We weren't doing stability for my health. Y'all just witnessed my stability, right? Okay? We weren't doing it for my health. I've worked on it myself. I've done my own PT, okay? I want you to know within your body, what do you need? Are your hips really tight today? Well, then maybe that sumo squat stretch might be where we want to go. And we might want to follow that up with some stick massage with release, right? Because we're not just going to grind it out, but we're actually going to work on some lengthening with that. Or we're going to do the massage gun, but with activation. So maybe we're going to put that massage gun on our quad, but we're actually going to do activation with it. Because we're starting to recognize that our hips are where we're feeling it the most. Maybe you're feeling it in your upper body, and you want to do your SuperSix with some band stretches. And then you're like, you know what, Val, I really just want to walk. Or maybe you want to do contrast because you feel like it feels good. Or maybe we're playing Baylor tomorrow and you really, really want that cold tub. Cool, that's your choice. So how did I manage the kids that do a little extra? How am I doing, Mark? Am I still okay? So this guy right here is an amazing human being. His name is Hella Sidibe, and he is the first black man to run from LA to New York. He did it in 84 days. I don't know if I could drive that in 84 days because I might get bored. He ran it. This is me. I actually met him up in Oklahoma. That was his RV that he slept in. So I worked a lot with him on his recovery because how do you really help someone recover that's running 40 miles a day? Really, really no magic button, right? So we really addressed needs. Nutrition was huge for him. He's a vegan athlete. I left that to someone with a different degree than myself to figure out how to get enough protein into this guy so his muscles didn't waste away. But we really talked about him figuring out in between his breaks and at the end of the day what was the most efficient thing for him to do. It was not active recovery. He has been active enough. So what things could we do? One of my favorite things we did is a very simple yoga pose called leg on wall. If you haven't ever tried it before, lay on the floor and put your legs up on the wall. You're welcome. If that wasn't worth the price of admission, I don't know what was, right? So leg up on the wall, why? Because gravity now helps you. When you've been like this for 40 miles, right? Gravity is not your friend. So he would literally come in the RV and he would put his legs up on the wall. Amazing human, amazing human. You should follow him on social media. He's about to do another crazy challenge. He asked me to meet him a couple times. I'm going to just because I want to see it happen, but he's insane. I actually got to meet him in New York at the finish line. It was one of the most emotional moments of my career, just getting to see someone who, the mental toughness of running 40 miles a day for 84 consecutive days. Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. This athlete over here, I want to make a mention because I think this goes back to the individualization component. This is a professional volleyball player. I had the opportunity to work with AU Pro Volleyball in Fort Worth last year. And this is an athlete who was having some quad stuff going on, but we really identified that her one leg was an activation issue and her other leg was a recovery issue. So I utilized dynamic tape to help with the activation on one leg and an Incrediwear sleeve on the other leg to help with recovery. Now at night, she still slept in her recovery tights for both legs, but this was again just looking at even bilaterally comparing and not just blanket applying a recovery technique, but really understanding what was going on and making the adaptation there. Oh, sweet Kawhi. This is from a couple years ago, but he talks about load management. And when I hear load management, I think it gets a bad rap because usually in the NBA that just means don't play. But to me, load management is being smart with how we are looking at load. And what does load really mean? What tolerance does your athlete have for load? How much load can they handle? What is their tipping point? Sometimes this isn't applicable in the secondary setting, obviously, for, you have a ton of athletes, but maybe you can identify one or two that we really need to be smart with. Do you have some athletes that are playing multiple sports, that are playing offense and defense, that maybe we need to take a look at and think about how we can manage their load throughout the week so that they're in the best state they can be when performance is required? This is the Washington football team. I remembered this time to say the correct name, although they're coming out with a new name on the 2nd. 2/2 of 22, they're releasing their new name. They actually measured each of their athletes for their own custom bed. If that doesn't look like an investment in your sleep, I don't know what is. I don't know of a school around here that's going to make that investment, but I do know of schools that are now installing nap pods. It's true. Okay, what are some of the things that I used and why does it matter? Okay, Cryasana. How many of you have athletes that pay a subscription to go do a Cryasana or think it's the end-all be-all? Okay. We actually had one at TCU, and it was kind of the bane of my existence because they were told that 2 minutes equaled fully recovered. Sweet babies, if 2 minutes really made you recover, do you not think I would have you in that thing every day? But it doesn't. It makes you feel numb, and the research again, when research is always sponsored by the people who pay for the product, you can kind of start to tell how the research is going to look, right? When did I use it? When they had done all the other things that I asked them to do, and they really wanted it, and there was a reason to use it. I recently had someone tell me, I bought a $400 a month subscription to this cryo place. What should I do? And my response was ask for a refund. Okay? I actually have friends that own them. We're putting our product into them, so it's probably a bad business move on my behalf, but the idea there was, well, you don't know every day what you're going to need. You don't know after what activity you're going to want that. These are Incrediwear sleeves. I love them. There is some good research out on compression garments. There's a lot out there now. Again, I would look at their validity, look at their website, see if they actually have anything backing up their product or if it's just being sold on Amazon. It may not have the same compression benefits that others do. I put the old school recovery boots up here because now there's 1 gazillion versions of air-filled pumped boots out there in the world. Again, I think these are great. I definitely think they have their place. As you can see, I had 4 athletes lined up using them. They were part of my recovery chart. We had some great benefits. I definitely see their use. Figure out when is your best time to use them. For some athletes, using them before practice actually helped, because they had been sitting all day and they were stiff and tight and they just needed to open up and lay. It worked really well for some of them. Firefly, have any of you ever used Firefly? It's based on technology called the Gecko, which helps with DVT prevention post-op. And the same idea is here. It's using a low-grade electrical stimulation right over the perineal to provide a passive pump, something we used on the plane, especially if we had long flights. My husband, who actually has had DVTs, wears these on our longer flights. Really cool, kind of expensive, definitely an investment. But if you have athletes that are truly investing in that, they're a great option. The guns. I get a lot of question about when to use the massage gun. If your athlete hops up on the table and wants you to do it on them, you might already be missing out, right? Unless it's an area they can't really reach, I need you doing it because you're going to feel how deep to go. Did y'all see that Devontae Smith from the Eagles where he was telling about the guy? He's like, dude, don't use the gun. It's a bruise. It ain't going to help. Anybody see that on TikTok? Hilarious video. If you want to see it, come find me. I'll show you. He was like, I majored in kinesiology. I know what I'm talking about. Hilarious. But he was telling his teammate not to use the massage gun on a bruise because it was going to make it worse. Well, how many times are we just digging in on that gun, going up and down, everything here and there, not thinking about how that athlete feels? So again, a little bit of education that you can give them on the front end that they can take with them throughout the year to use it correctly. I love it with co-contraction and with activation. Love it for that. Whoop, polar, catapult. List goes on and on and on. Again, what do these numbers mean and who is helping you interpret them? Okay, whoop is great, but what does it mean? So what if you're not recovered but you have a game that night? What are you going to do? Tell coach I'm not playing? Or does that mean we need to take a look at what happened during the week and maybe make modifications next week? Right, so again, be really careful with the information you're bringing in if we don't know how to manage it. Headspace, calm, all of these. Going back to culture, I had an athlete who was from Australia. She was what we would label as granola. She was very holistic, so I went holistic with her. We went we went into my office and we did progressive relaxation. I even brought in essential oils. She rubbed them on her wrists, she rubbed them on her temples. We went through breathing, we went through progressive relaxation. If I did that with one of my girls at H-Town, she would have laughed me out of the building, right? I had to know my audience. I had to know who was willing to buy into that. But that was the technique that she really needed because hers was so in her head. She needed that time to just kind of bring it down, dial it down, and get her thoughts out of her head. So that's what we did for her recovery. Okay? And then this is the device that I use, and the reason I put this up here is we are, fingers crossed, we just are finishing up a study with Corey Stringer Institute through a grant with the Air Force to actually look at hand cooling for recovery. Super, super excited about that, so research to come in the future, but just wanted to put that up there as a reminder for me. Some other things that I have used, cupping. This is actually a bruise with, you can see the K-tape lines. So again, if you're using K-tape, I think there are some use cases for it. But again, how are we using it? How are we applying it? What are we using it for? Are there other things that we could be doing that's better? Or does it just make the athlete feel better and ready to go? Slap the piece of tape on, okay? But the lines in the bruise tell me it's doing something, right? Something. Dry needling, had some really great results with that. Again, with trigger points and some muscle tightness and spasm. Had some really great stuff there. So I think I did kind of okay on my time. Any questions that I can answer for y'all? Hopefully your caffeine has started to sink in and we're feeling it a little bit more. Oh, there we are, sorry.